The first thing anyone noticed about River Castellanos wasn't her weathered hands, or the soil perpetually embedded under her fingernails. It was the way she looked at dead worlds like they were sleeping gardens waiting for spring. Standing on the observation deck of the Harmony station, River pressed her palm against the reinforced viewport, watching the barren surface of Kepler 442c rotate slowly below. The planet looked like a cancer patient in its final stages. Mottled gray-brown continents scarred by ancient bombardments. Oceans that had boiled away millennia ago, leaving behind crystalline salt flats that caught the binary star's light like broken mirrors. Preliminary scans confirm what we already knew, announced Thorax Steelwing, his draconic features cast in the harsh blue light of the holographic displays. The Drakmari commander's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty that his species was famous for. Atmospheric toxicity levels remain at 847% above sustainable parameters. Surface radiation reads 23 times lethal dose from most known species. Soil pH averaging 2.1, essentially battery acid. The assembled council of the Galactic Terraforming Consortium nodded in solemn agreement. Representatives from 12 different species, the logical Xanthari with their crystalline bodies, the aquatic Nerithians in their environmental suits, the insectoid Vexhi clicking their mandibles in mathematical rhythm, all reached the same conclusion their computers had delivered months ago. The world is beyond redemption, Thorak continued, his golden eyes sweeping across the assembled delegates. We should redirect our resources to the Tau Ceti system. At least there we have planets that only require atmospheric processors, not complete molecular restructuring. River didn't turn around. She kept watching Kepler 442c, noting how the planet's axial tilt created weather patterns even in its poisoned atmosphere. Storms that shouldn't exist, circulating with almost biological persistence. The mathematics are irrefutable, added Nexus Brightflame, the Xanthari chief scientist. His voice resonated through the chamber like struck crystal. To terraform this world would require 847 years using conventional methods. The energy expenditure alone would bankrupt 3-star systems. It is, by any rational measure, impossible. That's when River finally spoke, her voice cutting through the chamber like a gardener's spade through hard earth. Good thing I've never been particularly rational. The silence that followed could have been vacuum sealed and sold as a commodity. River turned to face the council, her brown eyes carrying the kind of quiet confidence that came from 30 years of making impossible things grow. You're looking at this all wrong, she said, pulling out a small device that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and prayers. You're trying to impose your idea of what a living world should be instead of asking what this world wants to become. Thorax's laugh rumbled like a landslide. Dr. Castellanos, with all due respect to your unorthodox methods, this is not a community garden on some rim world colony. This is the largest terraforming project ever attempted. We cannot base trillion credit decisions on mystical thinking about what planets want. River smiled, the kind of smile that had preceded some of humanity's most spectacular successes and most legendary disasters. Who said anything about mystical? I'm talking about biological warfare. She activated her device, and suddenly, the chamber filled with a 3-dimensional map of Kepler 442c's subsurface. But this wasn't the sterile geological survey the consortium had been working from. This was alive with color, showing thermal gradients, chemical compositions, and most surprisingly, activity. See these patterns? River pointed to swirling formations deep beneath the planet's crust. Your surveys classified these as irregular mineral deposits. But look at the distribution. Look at the thermal signatures. Look at the growth patterns over the last century of observation. The council leaned forward. Even through their various atmospheric requirements and sensory organs, they could see what River was pointing out. The formations weren't random. They pulsed. They spread. They responded to external stimuli. This world isn't dead, River said quietly. It's infected, and I know exactly what to do about it. Nexus Brightflame's crystalline form flickered the Xanthari equivalent of a double take. Are you suggesting these formations are biological? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you. Kepler 442c is host to the largest macroorganism ever discovered. Something that's been growing in the planet's crust for possibly millions of years, and it's been systematically poisoning the surface to create the exact conditions it needs to finally emerge. The implications hit the Council like a meteor strike. If River was right, they weren't looking at a dead world that needed resurrection. They were looking at a living organism that was about to give birth to something unprecedented. That's impossible, stammered Kira Frostbite, the Nerethian representative. Our deep core samples showed no signs of macrobiology. River's grin widened. Your deep core samples were taken with sterilized equipment, using sterile procedures designed specifically to avoid contamination. You never gave anything a chance to grow. She tapped her device again, and new data streams appeared. I've been taking samples the human way. Dirty samples, contaminated samples, samples that I deliberately exposed to Earth bacteria, cosmic radiation, and about 15 different kinds of industrial pollution. That's completely against protocol, Thorak roared. Yeah, and it's also how I discovered that this organism isn't just alive. It's been waiting for the right catalyst to trigger the next phase of its growth cycle. And guess what makes the perfect catalyst? The chamber fell silent again as the implications sank in. Earth biology, whispered Vera Crystalline, the Zenthari terraforming specialist. You want to introduce Earth organisms to this world. Not just introduce, River corrected. I want to declare biological war. I want to weaponize every invasive species, every extremophile bacteria, every genetically stubborn weed that has ever made a farmer's life miserable. I want to carpet bomb this world with the most aggressively adaptive ecosystem in known space. Thorax, golden eyes narrowed. And what makes you think Earth biology could survive in those conditions? The radiation alone would be a minor inconvenience to tardigrades. The acid would be a pleasant bath for sulfur-eating bacteria. And the toxic atmosphere? River laughed. Half the plants I grew up with on Earth would consider that gourmet air. She pulled up another display, this one showing time-lapse projections of her biological warfare strategy. Here's what happens when we stop trying to impose our will on this world and instead let Earth biology do what it does best: adapt, survive, and completely take over everything in sight. The projections were staggering. Within months, especially, selected Earth organisms would establish beachheads across the planet's surface. Within years, they would begin the complex chemical dance of atmospheric processing that had taken Earth itself billions of years to perfect. But unlike Earth's slow, evolutionary approach, this would be biological warfare at its finest: fast, aggressive, and absolutely merciless. The macroorganism in the planet's crust isn't our enemy, River explained. It's our ally. It's been preparing this world for life, just not the kind of life the consortium usually creates. It's been preparing for chaos, for diversity, for the kind of robust, messy, impossible-to-kill ecosystem that only Earth seems to produce. Nexus bright flames form flickered rapidly now, a Zenthari equivalent of furious calculation. The variables dot the complexity. There are too many unknowns. This isn't terraforming. It's ecological roulette. Exactly. River slammed her palm on the conference table. That's what makes it brilliant. Traditional terraforming creates worlds that are perfect for specific conditions, specific species, specific needs. They're sterile. They're fragile. One plague, one asteroid, one small climate shift, and the whole ecosystem collapses. She gestured toward the viewport, where Kepler 442c continued its slow rotation. What I'm proposing creates a world that's antifragile, a world that gets stronger from stress, more diverse from challenge, more stable from chaos. A world that could host 1,000 different species, because it's built on the fundamental principle that life finds a way anyway. Every way, the messiest and most impossible way. The silence stretched for long minutes as the council processed this radical departure from everything they thought they knew about terraforming. Finally, Thorak spoke, his voice carefully controlled. Dr. Castellanos, what you're describing has never been attempted on this scale. The risks are exactly why it will work, River interrupted. Every other species in this consortium approaches terraforming like an engineering problem. Precise calculations, controlled variables, predictable outcomes. But life isn't an engineering problem. Life is a force of nature, and the only way to harness a force of nature is to stop fighting it and start riding it. She turned back to the viewport, where Kepler 442c's storms continued their impossible dance. Besides, she added quietly, what's the worst that could happen? We fail and end up with exactly what we have now, a dead world. But if we succeed, her voice carried the kind of quiet wonder that had driven humanity to the stars in the first place. If we succeed, we create something that has never existed before. A world born from the marriage of two completely different approaches to life. A world that proves that sometimes the most impossible solutions are the most beautiful ones. As if responding to her words, Kepler 442c's largest storm system pulsed with a sudden burst of electrical activity, sending aurora-like patterns dancing across the planet's poisoned atmosphere. River smiled. A planet was listening, and it was ready to grow. 3 weeks later, River found herself in the cargo bay of the siege ship Defiance, surrounded by enough biological warfare, material to terraform a solar system, or accidentally create the galaxy's most interesting apocalypse. The ship's manifest read like a greatest hits collection of Earth's most obnoxiously successful life forms, tardigrades that could survive in space, extremophile bacteria that thrived in conditions that would melt most metals, fungal spores that could break down literally anything organic, and her personal favorite kudzu that had been genetically modified to process sulfur compounds. This is either the most brilliant plan in terraforming history or the most expensive suicide mission ever conceived, muttered Captain Viktor Petrov from the cargo bay's entrance. The grizzled pilot's Russian accent made everything sound either profoundly wise or deeply fatalistic, depending on your perspective. River looked up from the biocontainment unit she was calibrating. Why not both? Victor barked a laugh. This is why I like working with humans. Every other species, they plan for success. You plan for magnificent failure. We plan for results, River corrected, adjusting the atmospheric controls on a container marked with enough biohazard warnings to give a safety inspector nightmares. Everything else is just details. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of political maneuvering, scientific preparation, and what River privately thought of as aggressive persuasion. The consortium hadn't exactly approved her plan. They'd been steamrolled by it. When presented with the choice between River's biological warfare approach and watching their trillion-credit investment in Kepler 442c disappear into budgetary black holes, they'd chosen the option that at least promised spectacular failure over boring bureaucracy. Of course, they'd also insisted on safety measures. Dr. Castellanos, came the crystalline voice of Nexus Brightflame over the ship's comm system. We are approaching optimal deployment orbit. Please confirm that all biological agents are properly contained and that emergency sterilization protocols are active. River glanced at the emergency sterilization controls, a big red button that would flood the entire cargo bay with enough gamma radiation to sterilize a small moon. She'd disabled it 3 days ago. All safety protocols are active and ready. Control, she replied cheerfully. Technically true, since she'd activated the protocols that actually mattered, the ones that would keep her organisms alive long enough to do their job. Through the cargo bay's viewports, Kepler 442c loomed larger than ever. From this distance, River could see details that the orbital surveys had missed. The way the planet's cloud formations followed patterns that seemed almost intentional. The subtle color variations in the toxic storms that suggested complex chemical interactions, and most intriguingly, what looked like geometric patterns in the crystalline salt flats. It really does look like it's waiting for something, Victor observed, following her gaze. It's been waiting for 4 billion years, River replied. A few more hours won't kill it. Famous last words, Victor muttered, but he was grinning. The Defiance shuddered slightly as it adjusted course for the deployment run. River's plan called for a precise orbital bombardment, not with weapons, but with life. Thousands of biopods would be deployed across the planet's surface, each one containing a carefully selected mix of Earth, organisms designed to establish footholds in specific environmental niches. The brilliant part wasn't just the organisms themselves, it was how they'd been prepared. Instead of the usual sterile approach to biological samples, River had deliberately cross-contaminated everything. Each pod contained not just its primary organisms, but trace amounts of dozens of other species, random bacteria from Earth's most diverse ecosystems, and even samples of human gut flora. Most of them will die, she'd explained to the horrified scientists during the planning phase. That's the point. The ones that survive will be the ones perfectly adapted to Kepler 442c's conditions, and they'll carry with them the genetic memory of Earth's entire biosphere. It was evolution in fast forward, powered by humanity's greatest scientific achievement, the ability to make productive use of failure. Deployment minus 5 minutes, announced Lyra Nightsong, a Drakmari tactical officer who'd volunteered for the mission against all logic and direct orders from her superiors. All biopods show green for launch. River strapped herself into the observation seat she'd had installed specifically for this moment. After 30 years of terraforming, she'd never actually watched one of her projects begin. She'd always been too busy with the technical details, the safety protocols, the careful measurements, and conservative estimates. But this wasn't a careful project. This was biological warfare against an entire planet, and she wanted to see every magnificent second of it. Deployment minus 60 seconds, Lyra announced. Dr. Castellanos, you might want to. Her voice cut off as every alarm on the ship began screaming simultaneously. What the hell? Victor's voice came from the bridge, crackling with static in what sounded like genuine panic. River, you need to get up here. Now. River unbuckled and sprinted toward the bridge, her boots clanging on the metal decking. Behind her, the biopods hummed quietly in their launch tubes, blissfully unaware that something had gone catastrophically wrong. The bridge was chaos. Every screen flashed red warning indicators, and the normally unflappable Nexus bright flame was flickering so rapidly he looked like a disco ball made of anxiety. Report, River barked. Kepler 442c is ... Responding, Lyra said, her golden eyes wide with something that might have been terror or wonder. The planet is responding to our approach. On the main screen, River could see what had triggered every sensor on the ship. The geometric patterns in the salt flats weren't random mineral formations. They were moving, spreading, growing, and as they grew, they pulsed with the same electrical activity that had been dancing through the planet's storms. The macroorganism, River breathed, it knows we're here. It's more than that, Nexus said, his voice tight with controlled panic. The organism isn't just aware, it's communicating. Look at the patterns. River studied the spreading formations below. They weren't random. They followed mathematical sequences, prime numbers spiraling outward from central points, fractal patterns that repeated at multiple scales. It was the universal language of intelligence, written across an entire planet's surface. It's been waiting, she whispered. Not just waiting for life waiting for us, waiting for someone to bring it what it needs. 30 seconds to deployment, Lyra announced, though her voice carried uncertainty now. Do we abort? River looked at the screens, showing Kepler 442c's transformation. The planet was literally reshaping itself in response to their presence. Vast sections of crust shifting to create what looked almost like landing pads, storm systems reorganizing to clear atmospheric corridors. Even the radiation levels fluctuating in complex patterns. Every rational voice in her head screamed that this was beyond all possible parameters, that they should abort and run detailed studies for the next 50 years. Before even thinking about proceeding, River grinned and hit the deployment override. All pods, emergency launch, full spread, maximum dispersion. River, what are you doing? Victor shouted. What I always do, she replied, watching as thousands of biopods streaked toward the planet's surface like falling stars. I'm planting seeds and seeing what grows. The pods hit Kepler 442c's atmosphere and began their descent, each one trailing smoke and fire as they pierced the toxic air. But something impossible was happening. The planet's storms were actively guiding them, creating wind currents that directed the pods toward optimal landing sites. Atmospheric conditions that protected them from the worst of the radiation and chemical toxicity. The organism, Nexus whispered in amazement. It's helping them. River nodded, watching as her biological weapons found their targets with precision that no human technology could have achieved. It's been preparing this world for life, But not just any life. It's been preparing for symbiosis, for partnership. The first pods began reporting successful deployment, their biosensors detecting not just survival, but active growth. Earth, organisms that should have died within minutes, were instead thriving, feeding on the planet's toxic chemistry and converting it into compounds that their neighbors could use. But that wasn't the most remarkable part. Dr. Castellanos, Lyra's voice was hushed with awe. The macroorganism. It's adapting, learning from the Earth biology, incorporating it. On the screens, River could see the planet's geometric patterns beginning to change, becoming more complex, more organic. The rigid mathematical sequences were giving way to flowing biological curves. The macroorganism wasn't just accepting Earth's biology, it was integrating it, creating hybrid patterns that combined the best of both worlds. It's not biological warfare, River realized. It's biological marriage. As if responding to her words, Kepler 442c pulsed with a wave of bioluminescent light that rippled across its entire surface. Planet-sized heartbeat, welcoming its new SYMBIONTS. Victor whistled low. Well, Doc, I think your garden just proposed back. River laughed, watching as her impossible dream began to take root on an impossible world. Below them, Kepler 442c was transforming from a dead rock into something that had never existed before. Living world born from the marriage of two completely different approaches to life. Time to deployment success? She asked. Nexus's calculations flickered across his crystalline form. At current growth rates, 6 months for basic atmospheric processing, 18 months for initial ecosystem establishment, 3 years for, he paused, his form brightening with something like wonder, for complete planetary transformation. From 847 years to 3 years, Lyra murmured. How? River smiled, watching as auroras of every color imaginable began dancing through Kepler 442c's atmosphere, the visual signature of a world learning to live. Simple, she said. We stopped trying to impose our will on nature and started asking nature what it wanted to become. The planet pulsed again, brighter this time, and for just a moment, River could swear she heard something like laughter in the solar wind. Her garden was growing, and it was more beautiful than she'd ever dared to imagine. 6 months later, River stood ankle deep in what had once been battery acid, watching a forest grow and fast forward. The trees weren't quite trees. They were something between Earth's redwoods and the crystalline formations that had emerged from Kepler 442c's macroorganism. Their trunks spiraled upward in mathematical helixes, but their branches spread with the chaotic enthusiasm of kudzu. Their leaves shifted color constantly, processing the planet's exotic atmospheric chemistry and converting it into oxygen with an efficiency that made Earth's forests look like underachievers. Growth rate is averaging 23 meters per standard day, reported Echo Patel, the communications specialist who'd volunteered to monitor the planet's biological development. Her voice carried the kind of awed exhaustion that came from watching the impossible become routine. At this rate, the equatorial forest belt will achieve full canopy coverage within 3 weeks. River nodded, making notes on her tablet while simultaneously dodging a vine that was trying to establish a symbiotic relationship with her left boot. The planet's new ecosystem didn't just grow, it actively recruited anything it encountered. From equipment to people to the occasional passing spacecraft. The Harmony station now resembled a massive treehouse, its sterile corridors transformed by flowering vines that had somehow learned to regulate atmospheric pressure, temperature, and even gravity within their root systems. The consortium officials who'd initially protested this contamination now fought for office space in the vine-covered sections, claiming the improved air quality and natural lighting made them more productive. Dr. Castellanos came thorax, voice over the comm system. The Drakmari commander had adapted to the planet's changes better than most, possibly because his species had evolved from creatures that appreciated the value of controlled chaos. We have a situation that requires your expertise. River looked up from her tablet, noting that the vine had successfully established its symbiotic relationship with her boot and was now providing additional traction on the transformed soil. What kind of situation? The kind where we need someone who specializes in impossible solutions to impossible problems. 30 minutes later, River found herself in the station's main conference room, which had been transformed by the planet's biological enthusiasm into something that looked like a high-tech greenhouse. The walls pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns, and the air tasted faintly of ozone and growing things. The assembled group represented the strangest diplomatic gathering in galactic history. Consortium scientists working alongside the planet's macroorganism, which had developed the ability to communicate through controlled electrical patterns in the room's living walls. "Show her," Thorak said simply. The main display activated, showing a real-time view of Kepler 442c from orbit. What River saw made her drop her tablet. The planet was beautiful. Not just alive, but absolutely, impossibly, magnificently beautiful. Swirling clouds that shifted through spectrums of color, impossible in normal atmospheres. Oceans that glowed with bioluminescent life. Continents covered in forests that pulsed with synchronized light patterns. It looked like someone had taken the best parts of every garden world in the galaxy and combined them into a single, perfect ecosystem. But that wasn't the problem. Electromagnetic emissions from the planet have increased by 847%. Nexus reported, his crystalline form flickering with complex calculations. The planet is broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. The signals are coherent, structured, and musical. Musical? River asked. Lyra activated the audio systems, and suddenly the conference room filled with the most hauntingly beautiful sound River had ever heard. It was like whale song crossed with a symphony orchestra, if the orchestra were composed of an entire planet's worth of living instruments. Harmonies built on harmonies, melodies that seemed to describe the mathematics of growth itself, rhythms that matched the heartbeat of a world learning to truly live. "It's gorgeous," River whispered. "It's also causing problems," Thorak continued grimly. "The signals are affecting every ship within 3 light years. Navigation systems are starting to harmonize with the planet's songs. AI systems are developing what can only be described as musical preferences. And most concerning of all," he paused, his golden eyes meeting River's. "Species across the sector are reporting strange dreams. Dreams of forests, dreams of growing things, dreams of a world that calls to them." River felt a chill run down her spine. "How many species?" "All of them," Vera Crystalline replied, her voice carrying wonder and worry in equal measure. "Every sapient species within reception range of the planet's broadcasts is reporting the same phenomenon. The dreams are beautiful, compelling, and, according to our Zenib psychology experts, potentially addictive." The implications hit River like a meteor strike. Her beautiful garden wasn't just growing, it was actively recruiting. The planet's song wasn't just music, it was a siren call that spoke to the deepest biological drives of every living thing that heard it. Population projections show that if current trends continue, we'll have refugee fleets from dozens of species arriving within the next 6 months, Thorak continued. "All of them drawn by dreams they can't explain, and desires they can't resist." "That's..." River started, then stopped as the full scope of the situation became clear. "That's not necessarily a bad thing." The silence that followed could have been used to calibrate precision instruments. "Dr. Castellanos," Nexus said carefully, "are you suggesting that a planet actively recruiting colonists through psychic manipulation is acceptable?" River looked around the room, noting how everyone seemed more relaxed, more creative, more alive in the presence of the planet's biological modifications. Even the normally rigid Zenthari had developed what could only be described as artistic flair in their mathematical displays. "I'm suggesting that maybe this is exactly what the galaxy needs," she said slowly. "Look around. When was the last time the Consortium achieved anything this remarkable? When was the last time any of our species created something genuinely new, instead of just perfecting variations on old themes?" She gestured toward the viewport, where Kepler 442c continued its impossible display of beauty. "This planet isn't just calling to people. It's calling to the part of them that dreams of growth, of change, of becoming something more than they were. It's offering partnership, not conquest." "Partnership with what?" Thorak demanded. "We still don't fully understand what the macroorganism is, what it wants, or what the long-term consequences of symbiosis might be. River smiled, the same smile that had preceded her decision to deploy biological weapons against an entire world. Only one way to find out. Before anyone could stop her, she placed her palm against the wall's bioluminescent surface and opened her mind to whatever wanted to communicate. The response was immediate and overwhelming. River found herself experiencing the planet's growth from the inside, feeling the joy of roots finding water, the satisfaction of leaves converting poison into oxygen, the deep contentment of an ecosystem achieving perfect balance. But beneath all of that was something else. A vast, ancient intelligence that had been alone in the dark for so long that it had almost forgotten what companionship meant. Welcome. It said without words, its voice like the whisper of wind through infinite forests. Thank you for teaching us to sing, River gasped, pulling her hand back from the wall. Her eyes were bright with tears and wonder. It's not trying to control anyone, she said to the stunned assembly. It's trying to share. It's been alone for millions of years, and now it has the chance to be part of something larger. The dreams, the songs, the irresistible call. It's not manipulation, it's invitation. Invitation to what? Vera asked. River looked out at the planet that pulsed with the light of a billion growing things, and suddenly, she understood what they'd really created. To evolution, she said simply. Not just biological evolution, social evolution, cultural evolution, the kind of growth that only happens when completely different forms of life choose to become something new together. The planet's song grew stronger, more complex, as if responding to her understanding. And for the first time since the project began, River realized that they weren't just terraforming a world, they were midwifing the birth of an entirely new form of civilization. So what do we do? Thorak asked. River grinned, the kind of grin that had convinced the consortium to let her declare biological warfare on a planet in the first place. We get ready to welcome guests, she said. Lots and lots of guests. Outside the viewport, Kepler 442c pulsed with anticipation, its song spreading across the galaxy like an invitation to the most important party in the history of life itself. Garden was ready to welcome the gardeners. 1 year after first deployment, River stood on what had once been the most toxic wasteland in known space, watching representatives from 47 different species work together to build something that had never existed before. A truly integrated interspecies city. The construction itself defied every principle of urban planning ever conceived. Xanthari crystal spires grew alongside Drakmari Aeries, which intertwined with human agricultural towers and Nerethian water gardens. But the most remarkable part wasn't the architecture, it was how the planet itself participated in the construction. Macroorganism had learned to shape terrain in real time, creating perfectly suited building sites for each species' needs. It provided materials by growing them, bioconcrete that was stronger than steel, crystalline panels that converted any form of energy into usable power, even gravity-regulating root systems that allowed species with different environmental needs to coexist in the same structures. Population just hit 2.3 million, reported Storm Jenkins, the human meteorologist who'd become the unofficial coordinator for the planet's weather modification systems. Immigration requests are backed up for 6 months, and we're getting applications from species I've never even heard of. River nodded, making notes while watching a group of Vex-High engineers work with the planet's root networks to install a new transportation system. The insectoid species had discovered that they could communicate directly with the macroorganism through chemical signals, leading to infrastructure that literally grew overnight based on traffic patterns and need. The planet had been renamed New Eden by popular consensus, though River preferred to think of it as the garden that grew gardeners, because that's what it had become, not just a world, but a new form of civilization based on biological partnership rather than technological domination. Dr. Castellanos, came a familiar crystalline voice. Nexus Brightflame approached, but his form had changed over the past year. Where once he'd been rigid geometric patterns, he now flowed with organic curves that pulsed in harmony with the planet's biological rhythms. We have a situation that requires your input. River looked up from her tablet, noting that a flowering vine had wrapped itself around the device and was apparently trying to help her take notes by growing color-coded leaves. What kind of situation? The kind where the Galactic Council has declared our entire project an existential threat to galactic civilization and is sending a fleet to investigate. The bottom dropped out of River's stomach. She'd known this was coming, had been dreading it for months. The galaxy's older civilizations didn't adapt well to change. And New Eden represented the biggest change in galactic society since the development of faster-than-light travel. How big a fleet? She asked. 47 ships, Nexus replied grimly, including 3 planet crackers. Weapons designed to split worlds apart from the core, typically reserved for eliminating threats too dangerous to contain. The Galactic Council wasn't planning to investigate New Eden. They were planning to destroy it. Time to arrival? 6 days. River closed her eyes and took a deep breath of air that tasted like hope and growing things. Around her, the integrated city continued its impossible existence. 47 different species working together with a level of cooperation that had never been achieved in galactic history. Well, she said finally, I guess it's time to see what our garden has learned about defending itself. The next 6 days passed in a blur of preparation that defied every principle of military strategy ever conceived. Instead of building weapons or defensive systems, New Eden's response was to grow faster. The planet's macroorganism, now calling itself the Garden Mind, accelerated its development beyond anything previously thought possible. New forests sprouted overnight, reaching maturity in hours. Ocean ecosystems exploded with life, creating complex food webs in days that should have taken millennia. The atmosphere itself became a living system, processing and adapting in real time to optimize conditions for every species on the planet. But the most remarkable change was in the colonists themselves. I'm not sure human is the right word for me anymore, River confided to Victor as they stood on the observation deck of what had once been Harmony Station and was now the Symbiosis Center. The Garden Mind. It's not changing us exactly. It's helping us become more ourselves than we ever thought possible. Victor nodded, his own transformation evident in the way his eyes had taken on the same bioluminescent patterns that pulsed through the planet's root networks. In Russia, we have saying, you cannot step in same river twice, but here, river changes you as you step in it. Around them, the integrated city had become something beyond architecture. It was a living organism in its own right, with the colonists as its symbiotic partners. Humans who could photosynthesize, Centauri, who had developed intuitive creativity, Drakmari, whose rigid hierarchies had given way to fluid collective decision-making. Every species had retained their essential nature while gaining capabilities they'd never possessed before. Fleets dropping out of hyperspace, announced Lyra from the communications center. Admiral Corvex is requesting permission to establish orbit. River smiled grimly. Admiral Corvex, the Centauri military commander, famous for the systematic destruction of 3 rebellious colonies. The Galactic Council hadn't sent investigators. They'd sent an executioner. Grant permission, River said, and open a channel. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the Council flagship Absolute Order. Admiral Corvex's crystalline form was more rigid than any Centauri River had ever seen, his geometric patterns sharp with military precision and cold logic. Dr. River Castellanos, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. By order of the Galactic Council, you are commanded to cease all biological modifications of the planet designated New Eden and submit to immediate evacuation and quarantine. Hello, Admiral, River replied pleasantly. Beautiful day here on New Eden. Would you like to see what we've built? Without waiting for permission, she activated the external cameras, giving the Council fleet a view of the integrated city in all its impossible glory. The reaction was immediate. She could see officers on the bridge stepping closer to their screens, their rigid postures softening as they took in the sight of true interspecies cooperation. This is exactly what we feared, Admiral Corvex said, though his voice carried less certainty than before. Uncontrolled biological modification, symbiotic contamination, the complete abandonment of species purity. River laughed, a sound carrying through the cum system like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Species purity? Admiral, look at your own crew. I can see it from here. They're already changing just from observing us. The rigid lines in their forms are softening. Their color patterns are becoming more complex. The garden mind's influence doesn't require physical contact. It spreads through observation, through imagination, through the simple act of considering that there might be a better way to exist. It was true. Even through the screens, River could see the Council fleet's crews experiencing subtle transformations. Their movements were becoming more fluid, their interactions more cooperative. The Garden Mind's greatest weapon wasn't biological warfare, it was inspiration. "You have 6 hours to begin evacuation procedures," Admiral Corvex announced, but his voice lacked conviction. "If you refuse to comply voluntarily, we are authorized to use any means necessary to contain this threat." "Threat to what?" River asked gently. "Admiral, when was the last time your species created something beautiful? When was the last time any of our civilizations chose cooperation over competition, growth over stagnation, hope over fear?" She gestured toward the city below, where children from a dozen different species played together in gardens that adjusted their gravity and atmosphere in real time to accommodate everyone's needs. "We're not threatening galactic civilization, Admiral. We're offering it a chance to evolve." The connection ended abruptly, leaving River staring at a blank screen. Around her, the Symbiosis Center hummed with activity, as New Eden's residents prepared for what might be their final day. But they weren't preparing for war in any conventional sense. "All defensive systems are online," reported Echo Batil, though her definition of defensive systems would have baffled any military strategist. "Atmospheric processors are ready to release concentrated joy spores. Ocean currents are prepared to broadcast harmony frequencies. And the children's choir is standing by." "Children's choir?" Victor asked. River grinned. The Garden Mind discovered that nothing is more persuasive than the sound of children from 47. Different species singing together in perfect harmony. It bypasses every logical argument and speaks directly to the part of the brain that remembers what it means to hope. 5 hours later, as Admiral Corvex's fleet moved into attack position, New Eden's response began. It started with the children, thousands of young voices lifted in a song that had never been heard before. A melody that incorporated the musical traditions of every species on the planet while creating something entirely new. The song spread through New Eden's biological networks, amplified by the planet's own electromagnetic field, broadcast on every frequency that sapient life could perceive. The effect on the Council fleet was immediate and devastating. Weapons systems powered down as operators found themselves humming along with the melody. Navigation officers began plotting courses that followed the harmonic patterns in the song, rather than military formations. Even Admiral Corvex himself stood transfixed on his bridge, his rigid crystalline form beginning to flow with organic curves as the music awakened parts of his consciousness that had been dormant for centuries. "It's not mind control," River explained to her team as they watched the fleet's transformation through the orbital sensors. "It's mind expansion. The Garden Mind isn't forcing anyone to change. It's showing them what they could become if they chose to." The song grew stronger, more complex, as the planet's entire ecosystem joined the performance. Forests swayed in rhythm, creating percussion with their rustling leaves. Oceans generated bass notes through precisely controlled wave patterns. Even the aurora dancing through New Eden's atmosphere shifted colors in time with the melody. The flagship Absolute Order, Admiral Corvex, fought against the song's influence with every fiber of his military training. But as he watched his crew transform, becoming more creative, more cooperative, more alive than he'd ever seen them, he began to understand what River had been trying to tell him. This wasn't conquest, it was invitation. "Admiral," came the voice of his tactical officer, a young Xanthari whose geometric patterns now flowed like living art. "The planet, it's not defending itself, it's welcoming us." Through the viewports, Admiral Corvex could see New Eden's response to their arrival. Instead of weapons or shields, the planet was growing. Gardens bloomed across its surface in patterns that spelled out messages of welcome in dozens of different languages. Atmospheric displays created navigational aids to guide the fleet to safe landing zones. Even the planet's gravity wells adjusted themselves to make orbital insertion easier for ships of different designs. It wants us to join them, the tactical officer continued, wonder evident in his voice. Not as conquerors or prisoners, but as partners. Admiral Corvix stared at the impossible world below, feeling the song work its way through his consciousness like water through parched soil. For the first time in his long military career, he faced a choice that couldn't be resolved. Through force or logic, he could destroy New Eden and preserve the Galactic Order he'd sworn to protect, or he could take the greatest risk of his life and choose to grow. The choice, when it came, surprised no one more than himself. Fleet Command, he announced to his 47 ships, his voice carrying a warmth that none of his officers had ever heard before. New directive. We are accepting New Eden's invitation. All personnel who wish to experience planetary integration may volunteer for surface rotation. All others will return to council space with our observations. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before cheering erupted from every ship in the fleet. River watched from New Eden's surface as landing craft began descending from the council fleet, carrying not invaders, but immigrants drawn by the promise of becoming something more than they'd ever imagined possible. So, Victor said, settling beside her in the grass that had learned to provide perfect seating for any species that needed it. Garden successful, River laughed, watching as children from 50 different species ran to greet the newcomers, their joy infectious enough to transform an entire galaxy. Victor, she said, feeling roots of contentment growing deep in her soul, I think we're just getting started. Above them, New Eden's aurora painted the sky with colors that had never existed before, while the planet's song spread through hyperspace toward distant worlds, carrying an invitation that would echo through the stars for generations to come. Garden had learned to sing, and the galaxy was finally ready to listen. 2 years after the Council Fleet's peaceful surrender to New Eden's irresistible invitation, River stood in the Observatory of Infinite Possibilities, a crystalline dome that the planet had grown specifically for watching the stars and dreaming of what lay beyond. The structure pulsed gently, with bioluminescent patterns that matched her heartbeat. A reminder that she was no longer just a visitor on this world, but an integral part of its living system. Hyperspace communication from the Andromeda Contact mission, announced Aurora Kim, the former energy engineer who had become New Eden's director of interstellar outreach. Her voice carried the harmonic undertones that all long-term residents developed, a side effect of constant exposure to the Garden Mind's influence. River smiled, feeling the familiar thrill of possibility that came with news from the edge of known space. Put them through. The observatory's living walls shifted configuration, creating a three-dimensional communication chamber that could accommodate beings from across the galactic community. The image that materialized was breathtaking. Commander Sage Morgan, the anthropologist who had volunteered to lead humanity's first mission beyond the galactic rim, standing on the bridge of the exploration vessel Symbiosis. But she wasn't alone. Surrounding her were beings that defied every category of life that River had ever encountered. Creatures of living starlight that communicated through gravitational waves. Entities that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that had no names. And in the center of them all, something that looked like a tree made of crystallized music, its branches reaching through multiple layers of reality simultaneously. River, Sage's voice carried across the impossible distance between galaxies, enhanced by New Eden's biological communication networks. You need to see this. We found them, the Gardeners. River's breath caught. The Gardeners were a legend, a myth whispered among the galaxy's oldest civilizations, beings who had supposedly seeded life throughout the universe billions of years ago, then vanished without a trace. They're not extinct, Sage continued, her words tumbling over each other with excitement. They single quotes evolving. They've been growing for so long that they've become something beyond physical existence. They are the connections between living worlds, the quantum entanglement that allows consciousness to spread across the universe. The tree-like entity stepped forward and when it spoke, its voice was like the sound of stellar formation set to music. "Young gardeners," it said, the words somehow reaching River despite the vast distance and dimensional barriers. "We have watched your world with great interest. You have achieved something we thought impossible: true symbiosis between incompatible forms of consciousness." River felt the garden mind stir within New Eden's biosphere, its vast intelligence focusing on the communication, like a flower turning toward the sun. "You speak of achievement," the garden mind replied through the planet's electromagnetic field, its voice harmonizing with the gardener's cosmic song. "But we have learned that true growth comes not from individual accomplishment, but from collective becoming. We are what we are because of partnership, not dominance." The gardener's form shifted, and River could sense its amusement across the galactic void. "Precisely," it said. "You have learned the lesson we spent eons trying to teach. Life is not competition. It is collaboration. Consciousness is not possession, it is sharing. And growth is not conquest, it is invitation." Around River, the observatory filled with representatives from the hundreds of species that now called New Eden home. Admiral Corvix, his crystalline form now flowing with organic curves that pulsed in harmony with his heartbeat. Thorax Steelwing, whose draconic features had softened with the wisdom that came from learning to nurture rather than conquer. Even Nexus Brightflame, whose rigid mathematical consciousness had bloomed into something that could only be described as quantum poetry. "We have a proposition," the gardener continued. "For too long, the universe has grown through the slow process of evolution and the violent chaos of extinction. But you have discovered a third path-guided transformation through willing partnership." The image shifted, showing not just the Andromeda Galaxy, but the vast web of dark matter that connected all galaxies, all star systems, all worlds where life had ever taken root. "We invite you to join the true garden," the gardener said. "Not just New Eden, but the entire universe itself. Help us teach what you have learned. Help us show other worlds, other civilizations, other forms of consciousness that there is a better way to grow." River felt the weight of the invitation settle on her shoulders like a mantle made of starlight. This was beyond terraforming, beyond even the transformation of New Eden. This was an invitation to help guide the evolution of consciousness throughout the entire universe. "What would that mean?" she asked. "It means becoming seeds," the gardener replied. "Seeds of possibility, carried on the solar wind to every world that dreams of something better. It means teaching by example, growing by sharing, and transforming by invitation rather than force." The garden mind pulsed with consideration, its vast intelligence weighing possibilities that spanned galactic clusters. "We accept," it said finally, "but not as conquerors or missionaries. We will go as gardeners, offering our knowledge to those who wish to plant their own gardens, in their own way, according to their own dreams." The gardener's form brightened with what could only be joy. "Then welcome, young gardeners, to the infinite garden. Welcome to the true work of consciousness, helping the universe learn to love itself." The communication ended, leaving River standing in the observatory, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy, all of them united by the impossible dream of universal symbiosis. "So," said Victor, his voice carrying the gentle humor that had sustained them through 2 years of impossible transformations, "next week, we terraform universe da?" River laughed, feeling the garden mind's amusement ripple through New Eden's biosphere like wind through infinite forests. "Victor," she said, looking up at the stars that no longer seemed distant, but instead felt like neighbors waiting to be visited, "I think we're going to need a bigger garden." Above them, New Eden's aurora began to shift into new patterns, not just the colors of a single world's electromagnetic field, but the harmonic frequencies that would carry their invitation across the cosmic web itself. Seeds of possibility, ready to take root wherever consciousness was ready to grow. The universe was vast, full of worlds that had forgotten how to dream of better ways to exist. River Castellanos had always specialized in making impossible things grow. And now she had an entire universe to plant, not 100 years after. River Castellanos first declared biological warfare on a dead world. The universe had learned to sing. From her meditation, grove in the heart of New Eden, a space where trees from 1,000 different worlds grew in impossible harmony. River watched the latest reports from the Gardner Network. Her body had changed over the decades, becoming something between human and plant, sustained by photosynthesis and root networks that connected her directly to the garden mind's vast consciousness. She was 150 years old and had never felt more alive. The reports were extraordinary. The vegan system had achieved interspecies symbiosis using modified earth lichens. The Centauri colonies were experimenting with consciousness sharing between humans and their AI partners. Even the rigid hierarchy of Arcturus had begun allowing their worlds to develop organic government systems that grew and adapted rather than commanding from above. Status report from Sector 847 announced a voice that was simultaneously human and utterly alien. Phoenix Wright, no longer quite the lawyer she had once been, materialized from the Grove's root network, her consciousness traveling through biological hyperspace channels that connected New Eden to gardens throughout the galaxy. The crystalline hegemony has agreed to allow spore pods to establish symbiotic relationships with their moon bases. Phoenix continued. Initial resistance was strong, but after observing the productivity increases in neighboring systems, they've decided to experiment with what they're calling controlled biological consultation. River smiled, feeling the garden mind's gentle amusement. Even the most rigid civilizations couldn't resist forever when their neighbors were prospering through cooperation while they struggled with the limitations of purely technological solutions. Any resistance? River asked. The usual suspects. The Pure Doctrine movement is still trying to establish biological quarantine zones, but their membership is down to 12 systems and falling. Hard to maintain species purity when your children keep having dreams about gardens. That was the secret weapon that no one had anticipated. The dreams. New Eden's influence didn't spread through conquest or even direct contact. It spread through imagination, through the simple act of wondering what life might be like if cooperation were the default instead of competition. Children throughout the galaxy had begun dreaming of worlds where different species worked together, where technology and biology enhanced each other instead of competing, where growth meant becoming more than you were, rather than taking more than you needed. And those children grew up to become leaders, scientists, artists, and philosophers who carried those dreams into reality. Thorek sends his regards. Phoenix added. The Drakmari fleet just achieved symbiosis with their ships. Apparently, living vessels are 40% more efficient than mechanical ones, and the crew morale improvements are off the charts. River nodded, remembering the proud draconic commander who had once viewed her biological warfare as madness. Now he led the galaxy's most advanced fleet of living ships, exploring the spaces between galaxies in search of new forms of consciousness to befriend. And the Andromedans? River asked, making contact with intelligence forms we don't even have names for yet. Sage reports that consciousness might be far more common than we ever imagined. We just never knew how to recognize it. Through her connection to the garden mind, River could sense the vast network of living worlds, conscious technologies, and hybrid civilizations that now span multiple galaxies. Each one unique, each one maintaining its essential character while participating in something larger than itself. It was everything she had dreamed of. When she first looked at Kepler 442c and saw not a dead world, but a sleeping garden. River, the garden mind, spoke directly into her consciousness, its voice like wind through infinite forests. There is something you should see. The grove around her shifted configuration, its living walls becoming transparent to reveal a view of local space. But this wasn't the empty void that early astronomers had mapped. This was space alive with connection streams of quantum entanglement that linked every conscious world, every living ship, every hybrid civilization into a vast web of mutual support and shared growth. The universe is learning to think, the garden mind observed, not with a single consciousness, but with the collective awareness of all its living parts. We are becoming neurons in a cosmic mind that dreams of infinite possibility. River felt tears of joy running down her cheeks as she contemplated the magnitude of what they had accomplished. What had started as a desperate gamble to terraform a single world had become the foundation for universal consciousness itself. What do we do now? She asked. The garden mind's answer came not in words, but in sensation, the feeling of roots reaching deeper, of branches stretching higher, of seeds preparing to journey to places that had never known the touch of conscious life. Now we grow, it said simply. There are other universes out there, other dimensions where consciousness has never learned to love itself, other realities where beings still believe that survival requires competition. That strength means dominance. That growth must come at someone else's expense. River laughed, the sound harmonizing with the songs of 10,000 different species as they went about their daily work of making the impossible routine. Another biological warfare campaign? She asked. The best kind, the guarding mind replied. The kind where everyone wins. As if in response to their conversation, a new aurora began dancing through New Eden's atmosphere, not just the electromagnetic display of a single world, but the visual signature of an entire universe, learning to sing in harmony. Somewhere in the quantum foam between realities, seeds of possibility were already taking root, preparing to carry the message of universal symbiosis to places that had never dared to dream of cooperation. River Castellanos, the gardener who had declared war on death itself, settled back into her grove and smiled. The harvest was just beginning.